So, hi everyone. I guess to the very first mental health and tech podcast. So, this is something that kind of has been taking several forms before, something that's been spoken about a bit. So, let me maybe just start by introducing myself and then speaking a bit more about what you're actually listening to right now. So my name is Schalk. Surname is Venter. I'll tell you in a second why I need to include my surname as well. I'm in the tech world. I work as a consultant, have a background in design, and also, do a lot of JavaScript development work in the web space and so forth. I'm also very much in the world of teaching and so forth, like teaching programming and design and so forth at a tertiary level. And I have recently been doing a lot more speaking on kind of my own mental health and kind of journey in terms of mental health and mental illness. And it's one of those things, like, once you start opening up about it, like, you just get all these other people that are jumping in and like, hey, I want to talk about mine as well. And, so I think there's been such a big interest. This is something that I maybe started out trying to just do myself, but there's been such a great interest that I spoke to someone else and we actually thought that, hey, let's maybe see if we can actually formalize this into some type of podcast or something, as a means also to keep ourselves accountable, because speaking about mental health is never fun. I can honestly say I actually don't want to be here right now. I'm having such a rough week and I not want to deal with this type of stuff. So there's also value in terms of that accountability. So the reason why I actually named my surname is because the co-host is also called Schalk, which is a tricky situation because Schalk isn't that common of a name, so I don't really know how to navigate this area because I've never really had to share a platform like this with someone else called Schalk as well. But let me hand over to him. So that would be Schalk Neethling. I'll let him tell you guys a bit more about himself, and then we'll just introduce our guest, Gideon, after that. Yeah, go ahead, Schalk.
Thanks, Schalk. I'm the other Schalk of the Mental Health and Tech podcast. As Schalk mentioned, this is going to get weird. I'm Schalk Neethling. I live in Pretoria in South Africa, and I've done a lot of things. Let me summarize it into what I'm doing right now instead of talking about the history. So at the moment, I am founder of my own business called Mechanical Inc. It's heavily focused on open source and education, especially for junior developers, and even more specific than that, junior web developers, and creating a space for these people to share their stories. I do that through another podcast I have, and then as Mechanical Inc., on the open source side, I'm focused on how to make open source more welcoming and diverse, because through another podcast I do, which clearly shows that I do too many podcasts, I talk with people in the open source space, and I've learned that, there's a reason why when you look at it, it seems to be one-sided. And mental health plays into this in both sides. So for junior developers, there's a lot of challenges around speaking up and having a voice in an industry that seems to only celebrate those at the very top. And then in open source, there's this challenge of not being neurotypical, I think, and also not being in a specific gender and a specific skin color, let's put it that way. If you are outside of that, there's problems. So, and I have struggled with mental health since I was 15, so I guess that's about 30 years now. And I've had successes. I've had super, super lows. At the moment, I'm in a relatively good space. So I think it's a good time for me to talk about the good and the bad. And also, I'm seriously curious about learning other people's journeys, like Gideon's, and understanding how they navigate this world in an industry that is so fast-paced and so demanding on our time and on our mind. So that's everything from me. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Gideon and let him introduce himself.
Thanks, Schalk. Shout out to a fellow Pretoria man. I grew up in Pretoria and I lived there for 30 years and moved to Cape Town about 10 years ago. So, still some really fond memories living there. My background, so I turned 40 this year and I studied at University of Pretoria, partly because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I studied the thing closest to what I thought I could do, which was multimedia, which was like this combination of visual design and computer science. So did a degree in an honors there. Coincidentally met my wife there. We've been married now for, I think this will be 17 years. And we've got a 9-year-old boy who's got some pretty rough ADHD, the things I've seen. But we can get into that. After varsity, I worked as a .NET developer for 5 or 6 years, and nowadays that's frowned upon. It's like saying you supported Hitler, I think. More or less on the same veins or something.
Yo, what a way to start the first show.
Anyway, so I'll leave it at that. And then I was to backtrack, before I studied multimedia, I was also very interested in human beings. So I thought I would go the route of psychology. But my mom, having worked her whole life as a lecturer at the varsity, was like, the problem there is like the industry is quite full and there's like only X amount of people that get accepted for their master's degrees or whatever to practice. So, keep that in mind. So anyway, that's why I ended up studying multimedia, but I'd always loved working with people anyways. And about 5 or 6 years during development, I kind of stumbled upon UX. I think it was around 2010 or something. And that really fascinated me, the intersection basically of, tech and parts or facets of human psychology and so on. I jumped into design. I'll get into reflections that I've had more than a decade later about why I made certain decisions and how mental health, I think, also plays into that. But nonetheless, I started full-time designer in 2012. That's also coincidentally when I moved to Cape Town. And I've been steadily trying to become a better designer over the last decade or so. I've worked mostly, I would say, in the fintech space more than anything else. Love to work someday on some healthcare products or projects. That would be great. Also very passionate. Schalk was really, I think, the guy that ignited or carried that flag for me, is like to be able to talk about it, because it wasn't like I was hiding it necessarily, but I wasn't like known for that aspect, I guess outside of a few people I know. I don't know if that was too much of an introduction, but that's
that was great. I also have to say, like on this specific show, you're going to have to be much more specific when you refer to a Schalk. But I assume that would have referred to me, since this is the first time you and Schalk Neethling meet. But it's interesting. But it's interesting, and I guess this is how things work. I would say the same about you, is that this is something I've been thinking about, speaking about more openly and so forth. And it was actually your talk that you did at UXSA, so UX South Africa, where you spoke about imposter syndrome, and just seeing the Q&As afterwards. Sure, I think the Q&As almost lasted longer than the actual talk itself did. And it brought up all these other things, not even related to actual imposter syndrome, around mental health and so forth, that I was like, sure, man, people really have a desire to talk about this stuff. And I was like, sure, I'm in a position where I talk about a lot of things. I talk about JavaScript, lots of other things. So why not also use the same opportunities to talk about something that is kind of very central to my own life? And like also to go somewhere in destigmatizing it a bit, because it is one of those things, like I think very similar to you, like I didn't necessarily set out to actually start talking about it openly. I actually just started, like I think I've never tried to hide it, just the way my life, and it might be because of my background in visual arts. So I actually, studied painting and stuff, and there's a lot of things you can say about the visual art world. I think one of the things is mental health and mental illness is less stigmatized in the world, like kind of this whole thing about like the tortured artist or the misunderstood genius or whatever. There's some problematic aspects to that, but so I think I've always just been open about it. Because everyone else I knew, like in the art world, were like kind of barely hanging on to sanity. So and I think I just like when I came into the tech world, I never actually just stopped talking about it. But because of that, because I've just been honest about it, like I almost like it's like at conferences I used to mention, kind of I have a history with like mental health and so forth, and just to destigmatize it. And what I would find is people would start asking so many questions about that it would derail the conversation that I was actually meant to talk about. So I actually removed it from my introduction just because of that, which kind of leaves this, like it's almost like now you have these people who have to talk about this thing that never really planned to be like, hey, I want to really talk about this. I want to be known as the guy who talks about mental health. I'd rather be the guy like, oh, that guy who like knows all the stuff about JavaScript. But just like almost out of necessity, like it feels like that happens just by sheer inertia alone. That because people are so like, what would be the word? Like people are so hesitant to talk about it that when someone talks about it, it just like attracts all these conversations and stuff, like starts gravitating towards that. I'm curious. So I think Gideon and I have kind of shared more of a journey in relation to this. Schalk, you and I spoke about this briefly in another show that we did where you mentioned about your blog and how you share some of your personal stuff. But I actually don't know that much about your journey. And so I'm curious whether you've found this to be the case as well, that, it's almost like if you start opening up about it, like there's no shortage of people that want to talk about it.
Yeah, no, for sure. Let me think about it. So some of the things you said made me think of another podcast that was, it's not, I think they deliberately only recorded a couple of episodes. It's, not Evan Yu, the maintainer of Babel. Dang it, what's his name now?
Yeah.
Henry Zhu. Henry Zhu.
Yeah.
Henry Zhu and... so he had a show he recorded, Hope in Source, and where they actually talked, Nadia Ekbal was the other person that was with him, and they talked about religion and specifically Christianity. And I think in the world of tech and science, it's almost, I can almost compare that to talking about mental health in the sense that a lot of people, if you listen to scientists and tech people, more often than not, they're agnostic. So talking about religion and then talking about specifically Christianity is almost, I can imagine it's very uncomfortable because you're not sure how this is going to be received as a person in the sciences. So I can kind of draw parallels between the two. And so that's kind of how it's been for me. I have, over the last 4 years maybe, become much more open about just putting it out there and being okay with whatever that is. But at the same time, I do have to admit that until pretty recently, I was still compartmentalizing. I mentioned this to you, that I had this stuff I wrote about on Medium that was very open and like honest and everything, but I wouldn't go around telling people about that. Like, you know, if I tweeted something, it wouldn't be, I just wrote a blog post about XYZ. But then some people stumbled upon it and they like would private message me and they would say, holy cow, I didn't know you went through all of that. And I'm inspired by reading that and thank you for writing it and being so honest. And the more I heard that, the more I was like, wait a minute. If this is helping people, then I should be talking about it more. And so I've deliberately like not compartmentalized anymore. But it's hard. It's scary. It really is. Because you never know how a client or if you're full-time employed, how your employer, how your manager would react if you suddenly say, you know, I'm having a rough time. It's not, you won't see it physically, but I'm struggling and I need a day or two just to find my feet again. You're never sure how that's going to land. And so I still find that hard, to be honest. I'm still a little concerned about that sometimes. So I do the thing with what they call masking or switching, like pretending that everything's okay when it's not, but then only speaking to people on the back, you know, your little private Slack groups that you end up creating. And amongst yourselves, you would talk about, I'm having a tough time, and people would be supportive. So I think that is why this is so important, so that we don't have to feel like this anymore. Because, yeah, the old thing, if you have a broken leg, you know, people don't just say, walk it off. You need actual medical care to get your leg fixed. So I think the same goes for this. While it's not always observable from the outside, it has very, very real impact on your quality of life and your ability to do the work that you need to do. And so, yeah, I'm glad we're talking about this more openly.
Yeah. I think that also like ties in kind of, I think Gideon also has quite a bit to like say on that as well, because I know you've spoken about this quite a bit, which kind of like you went through a very tough time, specifically related to your wife being ill, and kind of like almost being in that kind of survivor mode, you know. So obviously you have an inclination to like a lot of, you know, like I don't know what the word would be, but you know, like for myself, I would say I have an inclination to, you know, behavior and thoughts and stuff that tend to be a bit neurotic. But then, like, even just well-adjusted people, you know, so Schalk says, to just give you context, so Gideon's wife at some point was battling with cancer. And, you know, so obviously he still had to go to work and whatever. So, and I think even for quote-unquote people with more healthy thought and behavioral patterns, that is crushing. Like, so Gideon, I don't know if that is maybe something that you're perhaps keen on speaking to, and specifically how you navigated that process of, obviously you can't just be in the office the whole day being like, yeah guys, like everything sucks, you know, like, you know what I'm getting at here, you know. I often joke, sorry, like just before I hand it over to you, I often joke that one of the most frustrating things for me about being open about this is that people think they can't criticize you, otherwise you're going to kill yourself. like honestly, like it is so frustrating. Like it's, you know, a lot of times, like I'm like, oh man, I can see a remarkable change in people's behavior, like when they learn this about me, like, and I'm like, just treat me like a normal human. Like, man, yeah. And they're like, oh, I'm not going to say something mean about Schalk because he's not going to be able to handle it and he's going to have a meltdown and like just a mental break. And yeah. But anyway, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. But yeah, so obviously I need to manage that as well myself as well. So I'm curious how you kind of manage that, and like how you also managed it during that period where you just don't, I assume you just didn't go like, listen guys, my life sucks right now, don't ask me how it's going.
Okay, sure. So this is a bit random, but something that popped into my head whilst you guys were talking about, you know, we all have kind of I call it almost like whether it's a bad day or sometimes you go through a bad season. It might be a week, it might be a month, depending what you're going through. And something that's kind of become useful for me, and that maybe you want to try this on some of the next episodes, is like doing a check-in. The check-in is just like, what's my mental state today? It sounds super cheesy. I thought it was at the beginning, but I think it's useful because what it does is also, obviously, it kind of brings across this thing of like, firstly, being open and honest as much as you want to be. And secondly, that, because that's what we're talking about, stigmatizing this. So this week's been a rough week for me, kind of, not the worst, but it's been kind of rough. And sometimes I don't know why. Sometimes it's not circumstantial. Sometimes it's just something with my body. So apart from anxiety and depression, I struggle a lot with chronic fatigue, and I've done, let's just say that's talking in and of itself, like the amount of medical tests and things I've done and not found any concrete answers is outside the scope of this. But yeah, this week, like I've just been super fatigued, and as a result, it's just like everything takes more effort or motivation, in other words, to do. Like very mundane or routine sort of tasks. That's where I'm at. I don't know if you guys want to just give like 30 seconds of like.
I can definitely speak to that. Like I mentioned, I wasn't kidding when I said I actually don't want to be here right now. But that's a good thing about like accountability and like having a space where, and I actually find honestly that is the value I get from support groups, is that there's a little bit of a level of accountability. I can't cancel an appointment with a therapist and the therapist is going to call me and be like, listen here, buddy, you need to give me that money and you need to come and pay for that session, because that dynamic is just completely different. And I actually, I've also been going through a tough time. And I actually sent the therapist that I went to previously an email over the weekend, and I said, like, what is your schedule like? I think we need to maybe pick up some recurring sessions again. And I haven't responded, and he kind of said, like, hey, this and this. And I haven't responded to it yet because I've just been like, I can't deal with that right now. Just with all the work stuff that's going on, and there's a lot of stuff going on in terms of work. There's a lot of stuff going on in just like, so my second daughter is on the way in July, which is great, but also there's a lot of stuff going on there. Like my life is just like challenging at the moment, and like. And the irony being that, like, I can't imagine how I would be able to go to a therapist right now. But I don't know. Hopefully next week I kind of feel that I have space to do that. But yeah, listen, I'm not in a much better space either. But like like you're like, I'm fine. I'm functioning. I'm not at risk of not wanting to wake up tomorrow morning, and like it's just not fun. So like I often distinguish between kind of emotional strain that's paralyzing and emotional strain that's just like not fun. Like jogging that is not fun, or waking up in the morning is not fun. Yeah, this isn't fun at the moment, but it is what it is. And also notice how many disclaimers I gave there. Because it's so unnatural to say I'm not going through a good time, that you have to have all the, it's all right, don't worry, I'm going to be fine. Yeah, like, there you go. Cool, other Schalk. He's going to be like, I'm having the best time ever. I'm living the dream, guys. Like, leave us elite.
La vida loca.
Yeah. No. No, it's been rough. I think... I think the last 3 weeks really has been a little rough. I feel super overwhelmed. Some of it is due to, and again, here I come with my disclaimers. Some of it is due to me just not saying no when I really ought to. Some of it is a particular client that I would not name, where the environment is incredibly toxic, and I'm finding it super hard to deal with it because I have this like innate nature to one is make help others when I see they're struggling. It's very hard for me to sit in meetings and things and speak to people on Slack and know they're deeply unhappy and not being able to fix that. I take a lot of that on top of the stuff I'm already dealing with, and then I kind of overload myself, and then I get my wheels start spinning, and then I'm like, I don't know. What the heck am I going to do? Because I have work, and I have some clients I actually like to do work for. But then this one thing like drags me into the ground. So I have to find... I'm going to go a little bit longer than I thought. So what I'm trying to do with this specific situation is, if you go in Tibet, if you go to the monasteries there, they have this ritual where they give you 3 little pieces of paper, and you write down 3 things that you're carrying that's weighing you down that you need to let go. And then you take that, and they have a big fire going, and you would throw each one into the fire. And as it burns, you forgive the person you need to, you forgive yourself if that's who you need to forgive, and you let go of that thing. So that's what I'm trying to do with this. I'm trying to post these meetings, take a moment to just meditate or something, and just let whatever happened there go and make peace with it, and remind myself that I can't fix every person's problems. At the moment, I can't even fix my own. So, and then I need to move on. So, but yeah, it's draining. It's emotionally draining, and unfortunately, I load a lot of this off on my wife, which is not entirely fair. But I have to tell someone. I can't keep it to myself. So then I have to also take time to listen to her, to give her a moment to vent, because otherwise I'll just end up dragging her down. That's the other side of this coin. If you're struggling and you have a partner and you're offloading on them all the time, that's not fair. You need to also sometimes be the one they can offload to. So you have to find that balance. So yeah, no, not La Vida Loca at all. It's interesting.
Yeah. So
that's great.
Go ahead.
Yeah. No, sorry. That was great, because what we did is we were transparent, sort of, and we shared as much as we're comfortable with. And what we also do in this kind of, I almost call it a ritual, is we don't really comment necessarily on each other and say, "Hey, Schalk, you should be trying, I don't know, ayahuasca or whatever." That'll fix your problems, right? No one's giving any solutions. It's good to just share and kind of let it be, almost like accept also, that each is going through their own path, their own struggle. Sorry, just wanted to come.
No, that is great. And like, as mentioned, I caught myself like actually giving all these disclaimers and being like, oh no, it's not. And I think it just shows how stigmatized this is. Like it's almost like we just can't help ourselves. We can't just like leave it there and that is it. If it's someone else, we need to be like, hey man, like, no, I know it seems tough now, but like it's going to get better. And sure, like there's nothing in life that has made me feel as unheard as sharing with someone that like I'm in a really bad place at the moment, and them not wanting to go there with me. Them being like, no, it's going to get better. Like, it's fine. Like, don't worry. Like, it's like they're almost like not willing to accept that. Like, there's some catch, there's some out, there's something they can say that's going to make it. No, it's actually all right. You think it's bad, but it's actually all right. Yeah, it's sure. But like, how did we just end up on the Gideon podcast? That's what I want to know. Like, now I feel like I'm a guest on your podcast. Yeah.
No, sorry. I just thought it's
no, that
cool
was great. Yeah.
To not just have my perspective, but kind of how you deal with it, and kind of, just to showcase, I guess, the variety also. Like, I'm one case, your case, Schalk Neethling's a case, everyone's very different. But sorry, I did derail your original question. If you could just quickly...
So, yeah, I was specifically asking about, so Schalk Neethling mentioned about, like kind of masks and, kind of this mode switching. Like even now, like, so obviously, so we're having this discussion now, and I'm going to have a meeting after this at some point, not directly after it, but eventually. And then I'm not going to be like, yeah, guys, listen, like I learned all this stuff about like it's okay to just be okay if you're struggling. And I'm going to be like, all right, guys, let's get this backlog going. And I think like, so, because he shared a lot of his thoughts on that with me. And I know what he's also getting at is that like that's very exhausting, like doing that mode switching all the time. So I'm curious kind of like how you managed that during this time where you were having a tough time and, you know, your wife was kind of like battling cancer and so forth. Obviously you had to be functional at work and you like couldn't just, things had to happen at work. Like how did you, and I know you didn't, I think you mentioned you did take some time off, or I don't know if you did take some time off. But I'm more curious in terms of how you manage that kind of mode switching, of what work requires of you as opposed to what you almost require of yourself emotionally.
So I think and this is something I suspect I will try and manage till the day I leave this nice earth, is trying to not project too much of what I think people want me to be like. I think throughout maybe most of my life, I was a chameleon and I tried to shield myself. You know, your subconscious and, you know, a lot of other things are doing all sorts of things to shield yourself from whether it's physical harm or emotional harm. And I think in my case, there's a whole backstory probably to that and the way I grew up, etc., that all factors or plays into this. But nonetheless, by the time or my wife was now 2017 when she was diagnosed with a brain tumor, I was already very well equipped to kind of put it like that.
As
or very
one
well
can be.
As, you know, in masking. By then, without, I think, consciously thinking about it though. But, you know, reflecting back on that period, definitely, I was pretty good at it by then. And so it's not like I guess made it out like, oh, everything's fine. But at the same time, it's this conundrum we spoke about, which is like, I can't completely fall apart in a sense either, because the people at work were very sympathetic towards the situation. I was very fortunate. I mean, I can't speak for everyone in the environment, but like I was a designer, then it was like my creative designer, it was like my boss, and then his boss, and all of them were very supportive of that. I remember sort of our head of design even taking me aside, and he's not like a super wishy-washy kind of emotional person, but even he took me aside and he kind of, you know, talked to me about it, and he kind of just gave his sympathies and tried to support me in that regard. So I did the best I could. Then obviously, in my case at least, it was kind of like my psyche, I guess, for lack of a better word, went into survival mode, and this meant everything was compartmentalized, which is not completely different from how I am now, but it was definitely it's like on steroids. Like, you know, when your body.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you.
Hello.
Hallo. Wie is hierdie mense? Yeah, so
What's
you guys
your name?
can't. Inga.
Inga.
So you guys can't see, but my daughter is just like tugging at my pants down here. Cool. Sorry, I'll let you continue. Yeah.
No worries, man. So yeah, I think because I recall vividly like going to the hospital after work every day for probably a month or so, and kind of just trying to hold it together, I guess, but not almost giving away too much of myself emotionally, because then I would fall apart. And I don't think I was capable of a lot of, I would almost say, very good, like deep work and, you know, sort of critical thinking and maybe creativity during that time. Again, I mean, you can go look up studies, but typically when your body goes into survival mode, certain parts of your brain literally almost shut down. Your body's now going into like lizard mode. And it's like, I need air, I need food, I need a warm place to sleep. It doesn't care now about, does this layout work or does it not, kind of thing. So that was a rough period, definitely. Then my wife had sort of a relapse at the end of 2019. I then moved on to a different company, and the second time round, was to some degree a little bit less rough, because by then obviously we'd been through a first round, so I had a better idea of what to expect from the overall sort of process and recovery and everything. So I didn't go through quite the same level of stress and like my body shutting down. I was lucky again. The employer was like, we had a very informal kind of culture. So the CTO told me, take as much time off as you need. Like, there's no rush to get work done. There's more than enough work from a development side to do. So I think I took like 3 weeks or something off during that time. But for the most part, what happens to me during those times is just to kind of literally almost take it one step after another, because it's like if my brain ruminates or tries to think too much about the worst possible outcomes, it would completely disable me. So it's almost like a defense mechanism, I guess, that kicked in.
Yeah, like it's no, I 100% get that. And I think that's also what makes it so appealing for myself. So what makes it so appealing about just throwing yourself into work? Like I'm talking about other contexts where you don't want to deal with emotional stuff. You just throw yourself into work, because I think that stress and demand almost like forces you to not ruminate. But there's also dangers to that as well. I can definitely think about, so I was at a place, one of the most sure, and it feels so, I don't know what the word is, but it almost feels bad, like equating like this with like literally your wife like having cancer, but I'm trying to find a touch point here. Yeah.
Look, everyone's experience. No, sorry, just to say, I think everyone's experience. It's about the experience at the end of the day. Like you might not be literally on their doorstep, but it might feel internally like you are, regardless of what's happening exactly around you. And that's as valid, because that is in air quotes your reality at that point in time.
Yeah, and I think there are certain things that are different intensities of the same thing. So I think for me, like, so in, when was it? Like, I think 2018. Like, so I broke off an engagement. So we were engaged, about to get married, and like I just realized I can't do this. Like I can't, and that was a very tough period for me. And I like just threw myself into work as a way to deal with that. Which meant in retrospect that I never actually had time to process a lot of those things. But there is something about that, almost like that, I don't want to say clarity that you get, but that sense of focus that you get when things are overwhelming. I almost like I often joke and say, like, it's not the things that I struggle with are not like the really big stuff. Like the stuff that gets me is like the little stuff day in, day out. Little things like, this nagging sense of like, what is the meaning of anything? Like, why am I even waking up? Why am I earning this salary if it's all just going to be spent on life cover and groceries and, and like at the end there's nothing left. And, like all those are the things that get me. And then I'm like, why even anything? But yeah, like as you said, things come in different flavors. Mine definitely has a very strong existential bent to it, where it's very much like, I think so when I was So when I was, I think like 12 years old or something, I was actually in a coma. So I got meningitis, got very severe septicemia, which is kind of your blood actually getting infected. And so like it was very touch and go. And I think it's hard to say because you're such a young age, so you don't know, you have no control to measure it against. But I also think a lot of the stuff that like I struggle with was because of that, not because of like physically, but having to readjust again. Like so I was in the hospital for a very long time. I struggled with like really extreme headaches for a very long time. It took me a very long time to adjust again at school and so forth. And I think that has always kind of like in your subconscious, like it's almost like you always feel like there's something off about you. But so I think oftentimes things also take the has a specific bent in that direction where I'm like, man, was it actually worth actually even surviving that? Like, for what? For this, So that is kind of a lot of the stuff that I struggle with. It's almost like when things are really intense and like when it's... So also during COVID, when my wife we were 1 month away from giving birth to our daughter, our landlord kicked us out. And like that's a long, complicated story. Comes basically down to like, I don't know. I don't want to speculate too much, but we think his wife kicked him out and he needed a place to stay. So obviously it was kind of like this dominoes and he kicked us out. It's like, sucks to be you guys, but I need a place to stay. And sure, so things needed to happen, like my wife was like going to give birth in a couple of weeks. And, and in those moments, it's almost you get this clarity and you almost get this focus. It's the other things that get me really. It's like just the little things building and building and building. Yeah. Schalk, I'm curious whether you have anything to add to that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely have a tendency to go to the worst case also and ruminating on it. I mean, in the last 2-3 weeks, especially last week mostly, I think I got to a point where I was 100% experiencing an existential crisis with regards to all the AI stuff that's happening at the moment. Yeah, I see you're raising your hand, Gideon. And it is because there's a lot of things I worry about this, a lot of things. And some of that is the impact on people, like literally like people and the amount of the unresponsible way this is done, the way this is just thrown out there and even called early experiments with things you have no real idea what it can or cannot do. And you have very little control over it. To the point where, I was watching so many talks and videos and things that I was finding it hard to do anything else. And I had to, at some point, just step away from it for a bit and say, like, okay, this is not helping me. This is not helping anybody else. I wrote down my thoughts and I tried to just not read about it for a bit. But it doesn't help to stick your head in the sand and pretend nothing's happening. So eventually you have to pull your head out again. So that's something that I've struggled with. And I guess it's why I'm still in a bit of a flat spin. But I'm still extremely concerned. But I like the fact that a lot of people are talking about the downsides, because it felt like everybody's just like, and just putting it in everything. And like every tool you open, now we have AI. And it was like, oh my God. Anyway, and so that was the thing. Then an interesting thing happened. So at one of my clients, they have like this Slack thing, and every day it'll ping you with like, what are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. A normal like kind of check-in bot type of deal. And for the most part, this thing is cool and it works and it's fine and you give your things. But on a Thursday, it asks you a fun question. And it's interesting because it was fine until today. And today it was not fine. Because the question it asked was, what is the scariest thing you've experienced? And I was like, I don't want to go there. So I literally responded to it
That's not
and
what
said,
I expected.
yeah.
This question,
like,
that's the scariest thing I've ever experienced.
Yeah. So I literally just said like, I don't want to go there. And that was my answer. Because, I don't, like, nobody knew, but this is like an AI thing probably deciding this seems like a good question. But for a lot of people, that could derail your entire day. Because when you read the question, your mind is going to go to something. It's going to go to one of these scariest moments in your life and bring it back up. And they say, like, why it's so hard for people that was in war when they come back is if a memory from that is triggered by something right now, you experience it as if it's happening in the moment. It's
PTSD,
not like,
essentially, almost.
Yeah, you lose context about where you are and that it's in the past. You are experiencing it as if it's happening right now. So the fact that that question comes up immediately puts me in two places. One, holy crap, I didn't want to think about that. Now I have to actively either deal with it or just try not think of it. And then I immediately think about who else is going to see this question and who else is in a position they shouldn't be seeing this question. And what do I do about this? Should I tell somebody? And then you automatically get into that mind loop where you're like, if I'm going to tell somebody this wasn't appropriate, we should probably make sure this never happens again. Are they going to be like, ugh, really? It's just a question, It's like, to you, it's just a question. To me, it's not. And to somebody else, it might not be as well. You never know, like what happened to you, Gideon. Like somebody yesterday might have found out they themselves or somebody they love was diagnosed with a cancer or something, and now they see that question today, and immediately it becomes they maybe were able to switch into this mode. Now they're out of it, and now that's all they can think about. So it's interesting that these tools, it just shows you how these tools can have these negative effects on people's mental health, and you never thought about it. It's such a seemingly small thing, and I think that's what you were hinting at, Schalk, as well, where it's a small thing that starts this roller coaster, and now you don't know how to get off of it.
And then you feel
interesting.
Yeah, and then you feel stupid for even going there. Like I often joke that so like I'm much better now, but I think when I was at my worst, like it would literally just take someone in the supermarket, like the cashier at the supermarket, like looking at me weird. And I'd be like, I don't want to live anymore. But then you're like, okay, so there's that experience. But then like you beat yourself up about like, this is so stupid. Like this isn't a big, and then it's like, but now then you beat yourself up about like, okay, but you shouldn't beat yourself up about. It's kind of this continual cycle of just like, it's just beat downs all the way down. But it's interesting. I don't know if you ever read, he co-wrote it with someone else, so Eric Meyer. So a book called Design for Real Life, in which they actually talk about a lot of these things. And so this obviously predates AI, but it's probably going to become more prominent with AI. So he lost a daughter to cancer, and so one of the things he talks about is, so obviously like there's a lot of photos of her, like they were sharing a lot of stuff on Facebook, like, okay, she's in the hospital, she got like admitted today and whatever. And then obviously Facebook has no sense to actually understand the intent. So then they would get like the next year, they would get like, this time last year or whatever. And it would be like his daughter, like on ventilation machines or whatever. And not only that, but also that juxtaposition of, like the colorful graphics and like the like animated, like dangly arm people and whatever. Like, oh, like, see how far you've come. Last time this year last time, and whatever, like, so that framing, like, and he also speaks about like, man, how that rattled him. And at that time, I think you can do it now, but at that time you couldn't even switch it off. So the book is actually about a lot of these type of things. No, so I 100% get you. But yeah, like it's honestly, like as someone who's an admin on ZOTech, it's such a tough thing because like that is just like people's, like that is like the calling card, like the go-to asshole response is people shouldn't get offended or triggered or upset so easily. But anyway, and you know, like and to a certain degree, sometimes you feel like these things are stupid. Like I acknowledge that. But you know, it's also stupid. Like bungee jumping and thinking you're going to die. Because you aren't. You know, like statistically, how likely are you to die from bungee jumping? Way less than actually driving a car. But like there's a dissonance between what you understand and like understanding the ridiculousness of the situation and how cognitively it's not a big deal. But then there's also like all these other parasymptomatic, like emotional responses that happen. And then I think that's part of the conversation that's missing sometimes. So no, I 100%.
I would say I experienced a bit of that this week because like I've had a pretty good streak now for a couple of months. And it was partly because I didn't have to deal with this certain person on a project. And
I've been there. I've been there.
And unfortunately, this week I had to have a meeting, and unfortunately, she's someone who needs to give the green light on stuff. But it was this whole situation of she'd been unavailable to review things for months, and we're months into the project, and now it's like, well, finally she's got time to review stuff, but now it's also like, yeah, it feels a bit like a rainstorm. Of things. And anyway, so like during that interaction, I just felt like this person is just throwing, stones everywhere. And, I almost felt like, I'm just a messenger here. Don't kill me. And I had a follow-up meeting, I think 2 days later. And for nearly 2 days, it was like I had some of the worst sleep because my subconscious just couldn't somehow let go of prior interactions, this exact same feeling I had. And it's like I would wake up in the morning and it's almost like you said that, I don't know if it's the right word to compare it, but like PTSD-like thing of like my mind without consciously wanting it to go there. It just automatically, the moment I wake up, would go there and it would be like I'm reliving that anxiety to the point. I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but like if my anxiety is really bad, it's not just in my mind necessarily sort of emotionally anymore, but I feel my skin tingle.
Yeah.
Like
I get it like at the back of I usually get it at the back of my arms. Yeah.
And it's the worst thing at least for me. I hate that feeling. So yeah, it's just to get back, I guess, to Schalk Neethling's point that, sometimes it's the smallest thing that seems very innocuous, very, it's like everyday kind of thing for some people might trigger something terribly traumatic. And I think humanity in general, if it's about the whole AI conversation and a lot of other things, I think as humanity, we're not very good at thinking social consequences is the right word.
Yeah.
Through. We love to create. Look, I'm, I guess, a techie, so I love building cool shit. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, we're not very good at kind of thinking through all the different scenarios.
Yeah, and this is what makes it tricky. Is for a very long time when I was younger, I would have a lot of existential anxiety about the ecological crisis. But what makes it tricky is, so I've come a long way with, I won't say I have OCD because I don't have the compulsions, but I definitely have the obsessions. So I have, it's that classic thing of don't think about a pink elephant. And then it's like you can't think about anything else. I have to say, in terms of meds, the Zytomil has helped a ton with that. I don't know how I would have been able to deal with that without medication, because you can't think yourself out of the thinking problem. Like, the more you try and not think it, the worse it gets. But then, it's also so there are things that are just like absurd. I've had some body dysmorphia stuff where it's like, I'm convinced that my face is so skewed that it makes other people uncomfortable when I speak to them, which in retrospect is insane. But then there are things like that, which has an element of, truth to it. Like, how do you... And that's what makes it tricky for me. So there's also a great book by Ernst Becker called Denial of Death. I think it won a Pulitzer Prize, in which he talks about, like, we have to resort to neurotic behavior just to cope with the reality that is us and our own animalness and the reality of our inevitable death and so forth. Like, so the problem is when that neurotic behavior gets out of control and starts actually causing issues. But we, as humans, have a certain level of neurosis just to survive, because the existential realities of our lives would crush us if we didn't have these neurotic, like, coping mechanisms. But then that becomes tough. Like, how do you balance that? How do you balance actually being upset about things that are big issues, like, and just not going like, everything is okay, life is wonderful, life's a dream. And I've found this, like, I've been in work in a lot of places where I felt very vindicated, where at some point I kind of started second guessing myself, where I'm like, is this actually as bad of an issue as I think it is? Maybe I'm just being alarmist. And then everything's just exploding a year later. And I think that even messes with you even more, because it's like, I didn't want to be right, because now it's harder to navigate, because now it's fine if I can just be like, Schalk, you just think crazy thoughts, like, stop listening to your head. That discernment is hard for me. Like, discerning the crazy stuff from the, like, legit things that you should be concerned about. Yeah.
I can so relate to that. I mean, that's, I guess, great to some degree that the talks I've done in Imposter Syndrome, has been about is I went through an intense period of, essentially gaslighting myself, or second guessing, whatever you want to call it, myself, because part of mental illness, often depending what it is especially, I think people experience depression and those sorts of things, like, it becomes hard to distinguish, I guess, sometimes almost like good intuition, which I think we as human beings are capable of, versus sometimes it's not that is almost like triggering a thought. It's something that's sort of unhealthy. But through a series of comedy, I think, errors in my career, I kind of, it's almost like at some point I bumped my head in too many conversations, and it's almost like, breaking in, I guess, trying to tame a wild animal, and at some point it was like my spirit, in a sense, my, that motivation or whatever to speak up about things just gave up. I was just like, I'm just going to get shot down because, I'm different. Like, this is just going to get shot down. Like, I'm not even going to open my mouth about this anymore, because, and that is probably one of the worst things I'd also done to myself, was completely withdrawing and disengaging from certain viewpoints or conversations, because, this whole long process. I think I guess that's part of the whole thing about mental health in general, is the more we try and hide it, i.e. you don't go to therapy, you don't want to see friends anymore, you don't want to go out to the shops, yada, yada, yada. And the more you do that, it's almost like at that point in time, it feels good, maybe, or better, or whatever. But in the long run, it's almost like it comes to bite me back. And it's difficult. It's a tightrope act. It's not something that just goes away. But yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%. Schalk, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I mean, I don't know if it's related, but I mean, you mentioned we mentioned the AI thing, and so we were talking about tech and how tech is not always, we don't always think through the unintended consequences of some of the decisions that people make. So I was watching a video from the dudes from Center for Humane Technology, and they did a talk at Apple's HQ about AI and about the potential negative impacts of this if it's not done well, thought through, which is interesting because Apple hasn't really thrown their hat into the race just yet. So it's interesting how that talk happened a month ago. Steve Wozniak, who kind of was one of the first people to sign the letter where they asked all tech companies to pause on anything bigger than GPT-4. But one of the things I showed in there was this new TikTok filter. And they showed this woman specifically talking about it. And she's like, and then she switches to her actual, like, this is what I actually look like in real life. And it's a remarkable difference between what you see on camera and what she actually looks like. And I was wondering about the impact that has on your brain, because what are you seeing? How are you seeing yourself more often, as you are portrayed on TikTok via the filter, or when you look in the mirror? You're most likely seeing yourself more reflected back at you through the camera on your phone using TikTok. And when do you reach a point where you look in the mirror and you can't recognize yourself? Because you're like, who's that? That's what, oh, is that what I look like? And what is the impact of that going down the line on, people that, I mean, it's a problem, like some of these apps. People spend hours recording themselves, viewing other people's content, looking at their own content again to see if it's been liked enough. So it's interesting, like something so seemingly, again, small, what could the potential impact of that be down the line on somebody's, how they think about themselves and how they feel about themselves? And can they accept themselves for who they are? So that was kind of eye-opening. It just made me wonder. And again, that's where my brain starts going, where can this go? Where can this go? How can this affect people?
Yeah. I have to say, things get very real once you have kids, for me. I thought I had anxieties before. And now, I'm like, honestly, even just thinking the things that I got up to when I was younger, I'm like, sure, if my daughter does 25% of that, I am very concerned. It's like, immediately, as you mentioned that, like, you think about your own kids, you're like, how's that going to impact them? It's tough. Yeah. Cool. But I think maybe this is not necessarily the best place to end it off, but I think you're always going to have that problem in terms of there's just so much to unpack. And so you're never going to be able to tie, and I think this is what I've also found, like, especially of talks I've done on mental health. It's getting content is not that hard, honestly, you can just give me a mic and I can speak about this for 12 hours. Having some way to wrap it up is always hard because there's no logical way to wrap up a lot of these stuff. Wrap it up in a way that is comforting. It's almost like you're kind of meant to, like, it kind of by nature, you're going to leave it at an open conversation. You'll leave it at a point of uncertainty. So I think even if we continue this thing, we need to get used to that. Like, we're more often than not just going to say, like, okay, cool, I think an hour has gone by now. We probably need to look at ending it off into, like, instead of going like, all right, so that's a good place to end it. It's never going to be a good place. But yeah, like, so, and I think that's also why it's maybe a good idea to do this as a recurring thing. because then you don't have that pressure. Then it can be an ongoing conversation. But I think maybe a good place to end would be anything. I think what we can do is we can share stuff that we've come across that have been helpful or insightful. And I think from my side, I think something that this week has really been very insightful for me is, so we have a ton of students at CodeSpace at the moment. I think we have a cohort of almost close to 300 students who just started JavaScript. That's going as well as you can expect, going from HTML and CSS to JavaScript. So I had to have a call with them the other day and just reassure them that it's meant to be hard. And that, even hearing that is just so encouraging for them. I can see it's just someone being it is hard. It's I understand. And I think for myself, I wish someone could have said that to me at some point in my life. The tech is really hard. Functioning in a tech career is hard. It's frustrating. It's complex. There's nothing wrong with you. It's just inherently some things are just harder than other things. And I think I just kind of felt grateful that I have that insight. Just in being able to accept that just it comes with the territory. It's hard and frustrating. Yeah. I'm curious.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
No, sorry, I was just going to say, I remember my first year at varsity, and because at school, because I'm old, we did Delphi. And
pretty sure there's still some people that do Delphi somewhere. I'm not saying University of Pretoria, but maybe.
But by the time I got there, it was object orientation. So the first course module was Java 101, and trying to come to grips with object orientation, coming from Delphi, and good grief, it felt like a world of hurt, just trying to understand everything, and the textbook written by one of the professors was also horrible, but that's a different thing. But I think emphasizing to people when they get into something like coding or whatever, that it might feel hard at the beginning, but that's true for a lot of things. I look back as a designer even, and a lot of the things that I learned along the way was also sometimes hard, but whenever you encounter something new, it feels like that. And don't feel like you're not necessarily built for something. I think I've often convinced myself in different situations in my life I'm not cut out for X or Y or Z, and it was because it was really hard and I was probably panicking more than I maybe needed to. And years later, I would figure out, okay, wait, it's not that bad. It's a process. It takes time.
No, 100%. And the irony of that being I think there's a lot of voices nowadays that are saying that maybe OOP went too far, and that specific brand of object-oriented programming, some of it actually doesn't really make sense. And it adds a lot of complexity. So it's interesting that you kind of were this doesn't make sense. It's so confusing. And you're oh, there's something wrong with me. And not being no, there's something wrong. I think that's the difference between me and you, and why I'm probably still in development and you kind of switch over to design. Is I was no, there's something wrong with Java. This doesn't make sense. You don't need 50 classes to do a hello world exercise. This doesn't make sense. This is insane. But yeah. Cool. But yeah, Schalk Neethling. Yeah, I don't know if you maybe have anything that you maybe want to share that you encountered this week or found insightful.
Well, I mean, I think the thing that I mentioned where at some point you have to just distance yourself from some things for it to make sense, or to have the energy to deal with it again. Sometimes just giving it a bit of distance is what's needed. I mean, I haven't found any single thing that makes it better. It's a combination of things. And sometimes some of the tools that we have, like therapy, medication, meditation, exercise, distancing ourselves, these kinds of things work better than others. So I think, get the help that you need and try different things, and don't be like, there's a stigma around getting treatment, and specifically around medication. When I started writing on Medium about this stuff, that I started reading other people's stuff who would comment on mine, and that was one of the common themes, is people are oftentimes scared to say that they are taking medication and it's helping. Why in the world that is, I'm not sure, but here we are. So I just want to put that out there. Like, if you need medication to help you, then if you are able to, then please do. Don't see it as a moral failure, because it's not. There's an interesting video that I would recommend people watch. I think the title is something like "How to Do Laundry When You're Depressed," and I've shared that video around, and everybody that watched it was like, "Thank you so much for sharing that. I needed to hear that." And it's this thing that people think, if your house is not 100% clean, it's a moral failure. And it's like, when you put it into the bigger context of life, not picking up your clothes from the floor is no moral failure on your part, because you might, like she says in this one point, I haven't done that because it needs every ounce of energy I have in me just not to kill myself today. And when you look at it from that perspective, washing the dishes is really the smallest thing that you have to be concerned about today. So yeah, I'd recommend people watch that video. I think it's on all the things. If you just search for it, you'll find it. There's a book that she wrote about that as well. It was really that was impactful for me.
I'll check that out. Might even be worth getting a repo up somewhere where you can just have resources and stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Thanks, everyone. This was really great. I found it super insightful. The question is just always whether other people find it insightful. But I guess that's just something we'll have to see. But for me, I think this had a lot of great insight. All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for your time.
Yeah,
same. Thanks, everybody.
Pleasure.
This was great.
Cool.
Thanks, guys.